Yes, I call the Finance Committee to order, and we have Angela Whitworth, which will present our budget today, and afterwards we will need to take action on sending that to the full board for tomorrow. So,
all right, thank you.
Angela?
Chairman, members of the board, Commissioner. I am here today to present all of you the amended FY24 and 25 budget recommendation. Let me get over here into this. We were fortunate enough in the governor's recommendations this year to be able to do an enhancement in the 24 budget in some one-time initiatives. And then in the 25 budget, you'll see we have additional enhancements and looked at ways for maybe doing some efficiencies, reductions in efficiency. So overall, I'm really pleased to present this to you. As you can see here on the very first slide for the amended FY24 budget, there's an additional $34.6 million. I will comment that this currently right now is strictly an estimate. It will more than likely change coming up in the next few months. If so, then we'll come back and address that then. But we're starting out with the estimate here of $34.6 million, which brings excise to 2.162 in the amended 24. The Transportation Trust Fund fees and the Transit Trust Fund fees are staying the same. I will remind those of you who are new to the board, the Transportation Trust Fund is made up of the hotel motel fee, the heavy vehicle fee, and the alternative fuel fee. The Transit Trust Fund fee is what we call the rideshare fee, which is the 50 cents that's on Uber, Lyft, taxis, that is dedicated to transit in the state. Both of those items are adjusted based off of FY22 collections. So what you see here is what was actually brought in for 22 collections for actuals. And then in the state general fund component, there's an additional $1.9 million, and that is recognized in airport aid, ports and waterway, and rail. Moving on to this next slide, I've kind of changed it up this year, and I've put them in order of largest to smallest. So you can see here in the capital projects program, this is capital construction, capital maintenance, and local roads admin. That makes up roughly 49% of our budget. We're getting very close to 50%. In routine maintenance, it makes up 21% of the overall budget, which is the second largest. In general operations, the 279 is roughly 12%. In the administrative piece, data collections, planning, program delivery, and traffic management is all within the general operations program. LMIG is $216 million. That represents 10% of what excise is. Then we have roughly 5% is made up of our GO bond debt. And then following that, you have intermodal, which consists of airport aid, transit, rail, ports, and waterways. That's roughly around 3%. Payments to CERTA. In payments to CERTA, that is the GRB, the Garvey Debt Service, GTIB, the Georgia Transportation Infrastructure Banks. It's included in that, and Greta. And then lastly is payments to the ATL, which is primarily federal match and some operations for transit. Okay, this kind of gets into the meat of everything. For in capital construction, you can see the additional $8.5 million. What we will do with that is leverage federal funding with the additional money in the program. In capital maintenance, I will highlight there is no adjustment in the amended 24. However, when we get to 25, you will see that adjustment. And the reason there's no adjustment in 24 is due to the use of the one-time COVID funding that was supplanted into that program for 24. In program delivery, there's an additional $4 million that's coming into the program. And really, this is a modest 3% increase due to the increased number of projects that we have going on in the state. This helps deliver that within the program delivery. On the next slide, I'll highlight departmental admin. What this is a hardware replacement. And a portion of this is to replace the department's project data and management system that we have. That 2.2 will be utilized for that. The additional 3.4 in LMIG is for the 10% increase adjustment for excise. In routine maintenance, we have an additional $16 million. What this will help with is increased contracting and material costs. And I'll kind of use this for an example. We had budget days here in the department. We invited all of the district DEs in with their budgets. It was a very collaborative effort with all the division directors, commissioner, executive management. And I will highlight this. Alone in District 7, they needed an additional $14 million just to handle the guardrail repairs. Alone in District 7. The guardrail repairs. So you can imagine, so clearly not enough. The needs are greater and the cost, is not helping this. In traffic management, there's an additional $407,000 that we've put into that budget. A few months back, you heard the presentation regarding the recruitment of the heroes and the heroes throughout the state. Hopefully with this, it will help with that initiative in recruiting more heroes. The next slide. In airport aid, there's an additional $790,000. This reflects the enhancement that we were allowed to request because there's always more needs in airport aid than we ever have funding for. So those will be utilized there. And then in the rail program, we were able to utilize the one-time investment opportunities that the governor allowed for $1 million for the rail plan update. There's also in that number a little bit over $102,000 for the state safety oversight, which is a requirement by the feds to perform. And then lastly, the remaining residual, a little bit over $41,000, would just go for enhancement opportunities within the rail program. In transit and ports, there was no adjustments at this time. And then in payments to CERTA and payments to the ATL, there's no request adjustments made for either one of those two programs at this time for 24. Before I move on to 25, is there any questions on 24's budget recommendation? Okay? Yes. For the GEO or guaranteed revenue bonds, I had to go back and look at my bond schedule. It's been decreasing, and then in 25 it went up slightly. But as soon as I'm finished, I can look in my note and I can give you the actual.
It's more than 10 years. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, still on time.
Yes, but I can give you the actual.
No, that's fine.
Okay. It's not in the immediate near future. All right, moving into 25 revenue comparison here. You can see there's an additional $45.8 million being brought in to excise to bring it to $2.1 billion. And then in the Transportation Trust Fund fees and in the Transit Trust Fund, we are recognizing what the adjustment look back for 2 years was. So these numbers are reflective of what FY23 actual collections were. And then in state general funds, there's an additional $4 million going into airport aid, ports, and waterways and rail. Here again is the slide that shows my bar chart. We have now reached 50% of the overall budget is going to the capital program. So that's huge. And then in routine maintenance, they're still at 21. I will comment in 25 in general operations, we are less than 10%. We're at 9% going to operations for the department. In LMIG, there's a $217 million. This represents the 10% of excise. And then GEO bond debt represents roughly 5%. And then intermodal, payments to CERTA and payments to the ATL are still roughly the same, 3%, roughly 1%, and roughly 1%. Here are the changes recommended for 25. In the GEO bond debt, what we're doing here is the adjustment to true up what the debt service payment is. So there's an additional $9 million going into that program. In capital constructions, there's additional $17.1 million. What this does is helps cover the increased match requirement that we have for that program due to IIJA. In capital maintenance, the additional $35.8, this helps us maintain the needed investment level for resurfacing since we're seeing these higher bids and increased project costs. And like I said, in 24, The funds we had additional COVID one-time funding that was in that program. Now in '25, this helps get us to that level that we need to be. And then lastly, in program delivery, the $4 million, what this is, it's establishing the $4 million request that I had in '24, putting it in the base for '25. All right, the next slide. Departmental admin, routine maintenance, and traffic management. All three of these programs are clearly the adjustment to the base from '24. All of those items that I had requested for '24, I'm trying to put them in the base budget for '25. Those were in, departmental admin, like I said, they were for hardware adjustments and to help replace the project data system the department currently has. Routine maintenance is for those increased costs that we're seeing throughout all of the commodities. And then lastly, the traffic management was for the increase in helping with the heroes, recruitment for heroes. And then in LMIG, the 4.5 brings that to an all-time record high for LMIG of $217 million. Okay, and then the next slide here, you'll see airport aid, rail, and transit all have adjustments. We were allowed to do a 3% enhancement in state general funds, but we were also asked to look at 1% efficiency reductions within the program. So this reflects the net of those two amongst airport aid, rail, ports, and waterways. I will highlight, however, in the transit program, you see the additional let me look right here, $8.8 million coming into the transit trust fund. What that is truing up those collections from '23 on the transit trust funds coming into that program. On this last slide here, which you see in payments to CERTA and payments to the ATL, you'll see the reduction here. What this does, it reflects the decrease in the guaranteed revenue bonds in the GARVIes, as well as there is a slight increase in GTIB. Those of you that are new to the board, I don't know if you know what the Georgia Transportation Infrastructure Bank is. It's a grant and low interest loan program that is administered by CERTA that is utilized by the local governments. So there's a slight increase in the GTIB. And then lastly, there was a 1% reduction for Greta. And then in the payments to the ATL, you'll see an increase of $262,000. This represents their net enhancement of the enhancement of 3% with a reduction of the 1% for efficiencies. And these numbers were provided to us by the ATL, and they're just a pass-through through our entity. That is the FY25 request. Does anyone have any questions for 25? If no one has questions, Chairman, I'll make the motion. If you could please, the committee pass it out to the full board for tomorrow for approval.
Okay, any questions of Ms. Whitworth? If not, we do need a motion. Second? Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Anyone opposed, same sign. Okay, thank you for your presentation.
And I just want to thank George Christensen, Sarah McDougall. I want to thank Selena. I want to thank all the division directors and office heads and executive management for us coming together to put this together on a very tight timeline. Thank you.
I'll do it at the designated time.
Oh. But I was going to anyway. No, anybody's noticed. Well, I think you had a second.
If I can have everyone's attention, boy, that one's on, isn't it? we'll get this ball rolling on the Equal Access Committee. And at this time, I will ask Kimberly Keene, Director of EEO, to give us our presentation.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Hoping you can hear me too. All right, I'm not too loud. So I am here to bring you an overview of our civil rights programming here at the Georgia Department of Transportation as administered by the Equal Employment Opportunity Office. So all state highway transportation agencies must have a civil rights unit. So that unit has to be established as a matter of federal regulation. Once established, that unit must be adequately staffed to effectively implement the civil rights regulations or requirements. That unit coordinator, myself, must be easily accessible to the head of the state agency. I must have clear and unfettered access to the head of the agency, that being the commissioner. And the unit must develop procedures for prompt processing and disposition of complaints, among other responsibilities. So for us, what that adequate staffing looks like is 20 full-time employees, both here at the GO and in the districts, that have specific responsibility to each of those elements of our civil rights programming. Those elements of programming include Titles 6 and 7, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, or DBE, and certification and compliance activities along with DBE, on-the-job training, or OJT programming, and small business. So Titles 6 and 7 sound alike, and they certainly are very similar in that each of them deal with non-discrimination. Title 6 deals with non-discrimination as it relates to access to program activity, and Title 7 deals with non-discrimination as it relates to employment. So GDOT as employer. So Title 6 says there shall be no discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin in access to, enjoyment of, and or benefit provided by any federally funded program or activity. So what does that mean? Think about the project activity that we do around the state. So we have a responsibility on those large mega projects, on those alternative delivery projects, to make sure that we are communicating with the community where that project is happening about how that project is going to impact that community. Perhaps the longevity of that project, the cost of that project, how traffic patterns may be impacted by that project. And so we have a duty to communicate with the community where the project is happening. So Title 6 says, as we are communicating with that community, we should be cognizant of who that community is. So if there are folk in that community, for example, that are limited English speaking, we must make provision for those individuals to meaningfully participate in those outreach activities. So that may mean that we have to have language interpreters at that meeting. That may mean that we have to have materials available in that language at that meeting. We certainly should consider the location of that meeting in terms of its convenience to the community. Is the meeting in a location that is comfortable for, convenient to, accessible for the community where the project is happening? Title 6 requires that we consider those kinds of accommodations and accessibility in terms of that project activity, that outreach activity being available to those individuals in the community. For us, our Title 6 program plan is communicated both internally and externally so that we are aware of our own internal activity and the roles and responsibilities of Title 6 as it relates to that program activity. We make sure that meaningful public engagement is a consideration for all of our colleagues in the agency when we're talking about how we are making communications available to the public. Those limited English-speaking persons are certainly accommodated as it relates to, again, how we are making communication available around the state to the public. And we are responsible for investigating any complaints that we are not providing full and fair access as it relates to those program activities. Title 7, again, is about GDOT as employer. So Title 7 says that no employer shall discriminate against any employee or applicants for employment on the basis of race, color, national origin, religion, or sex, including pregnancy, childbirth, or any related conditions, sexual orientation, or gender identity. So that means we must have a process, a clearly articulated, objective process by which we hire and promote individuals within the agency. So that objective process for us is the interview and selection process here at GDOT. So that interview and selection process says that we have an objective set of criteria that we apply to every selection and promotion within the agency, that we have qualifications for each job title that we are hiring for, and those qualifications are the basis on which we're making selection and promotion decisions. That we are doing so, again, objectively, based on how the candidate is able to meet those qualifications, not subjectively, based on relationship with that candidate. We know that candidate, we're familiar with that candidate, we like that candidate is a family member, goes to church with us, whatever that is. That is not how we go about making those decisions. So having that objective process that is clearly communicated, that is a matter of policy here at the agency, allows us to say very clearly that we are aware of what those non-discrimination requirements are as it relates to Title VII, and we are compliant with them. Additionally, we are responsible for investigations as it relates to Title VII. If there is a complaint of discrimination in one of those processes, that complaint would come to the Equal Employment Opportunity Office, and we have equal opportunity specialists who are responsible for investigating those complaints. That complaint can come not only from the complainant, within the agency, but can come from outside the agency, in that the complainant may go to the GCEO, which is the Georgia Commission on Equal Opportunity, or the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, to complain about discrimination. We are then responsible for responding to that complaint and working with the unit of the agency where that impacted employee comes from. This also includes sexual harassment. So when we talk about discrimination, we're talking about one of those protected classes, and sexual harassment is a type of gender discrimination, but it is about bad behavior visited upon a person in the workplace based on that membership in one of those protected classes, male or female. And that sexual harassment can be visited upon a female by a male by another female, a male by a male. Gender does not eliminate or diminish the nature of harassment as sexual harassment just because the individuals may be of the same gender. ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act, is another element of protected class for which we have responsibility. So much like the discrimination that I talked about in terms of employment discrimination, ADA can be an element of employment discrimination. A person can complain about discrimination based on their status as an individual with a disability. If, for example, an individual has a visual impairment and so needs an accommodation in terms of some sort of auditory resolution to the ability to use a computer, to see the screen efficiently, perhaps an auditory accommodation is necessary. If we are unable or unwilling to provide such an accommodation or discuss such an accommodation, that might be an employment discrimination complaint based on disability. Disability discrimination also happens for us outside the organization as an employer, but rather as the state highway agency. We have a responsibility for the pedestrian walkways, for the thoroughfares here in the state, where there is need to have some surface response to an individual that is trying to traverse those highways or those sidewalks, those intersections safely. For example, if there is a curb cut at 13th and Peachtree, and that curb cut is not wide enough for a motorized wheelchair to navigate, that may be the basis of a complaint of ADA discrimination. We would receive that complaint. We would be responsible for going to that location, reviewing that curb cut, making a determination about what kind of resolution is appropriate, when that resolution will occur, how much that resolution will cost. And we do that by finding out if we have a project upcoming in that area. If, in fact, there is a project upcoming, we would attach that resolution about which that complaint is based to that project activity. Sometimes we can't wait for a project. We have to go ahead and begin resolving that complaint issue at the time we're made aware of the complaint issue, if in fact GDOT has responsibility for that location. Sometimes it's about finding out who does have responsibility for the location. It could be a local government, the city of Atlanta, the county of Fulton, that has responsibility for that area. But we would find that out and begin then working with that community to resolve that issue. Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, or DBE. So DBE is the area that most folk are aware of as it relates to our EEO civil rights function. We are the Georgia Unified Certification Program here at GDOT. So we are responsible for all things certification in the state of Georgia. So that means that we do lots of outreach. We're talking to businesses, we're talking to organizations, we're talking to individuals, we're talking to local governments about disadvantaged business enterprise and its value a certification has to a business, how that business can get engaged with the federally funded projects that we do here at GDOT as either a prime or a subcontractor. So there's sort of a cycle of activity that we are responsible for as it relates to disadvantaged business enterprise. Again, that outreach to talk about DBE so that we tell people how to go about getting certified so that they then have an interest in certification and they then come to us for that certification. Yes, ma'am.
Make sure I understand this. So GDOT's responsible for the DBE certification, training, et cetera, for those businesses interested in doing business with GDOT?
So for any business in the state of Georgia that has an interest in becoming DBE certified, we are the certifying agency.
Why?
So we are the certifying agency because Federal Highway, USDOT, decided back in 2000 that we would be what's called the Georgia Unified Certification Program. So we would be responsible for all certification decisions that happen in the state of Georgia. But it's also a benefit to us because being a recipient of federal funds, we have a DBE program that says we must have DBE goals attached to our project. And so we have the ability then to identify who those firms are that might help those prime contractors with whom we're working meet those goals that we've attached to those projects.
Because you have the database and you know that they're trained and everything.
Yes,
Sweet.
ma'am.
Okay, thanks.
Kimberly, if you don't mind, you might add to make a point of clarification. That's for any DBE outside of transportation as well. We certify people that may do any other federal aid work that would be satisfied DBE. And you might just make mention of the MARTA, what MARTA does as well.
That is correct. So we certainly are certifying folks that are in the transportation space, but we're certifying lots of folks that aren't in the transportation space. Lots of our concessionaires, for example, are at the airport. They are food and beverage businesses. They are service-related industries. They are the convenience stores at the airport. They are the Five Guys at the airport. We're certifying those firms as well that don't have really anything to do with transportation. And MARTA is our certifying partner. So once upon a time when we had to do all of our what's called an on-site interview in person, we divided the state up into all of the state and the 3 counties in the metro, Fulton County, Clayton County, and DeKalb County. And MARTA said, well, we'll take those because of the close proximity to their employees. So MARTA is responsible for certifying firms in Fulton, Clayton, or DeKalb County. We then are responsible for the rest of the state. So we receive about 120 applications per quarter. So we are responsible for intaking those applications, reviewing those applications to make sure that all the attendant support material is attached. Once we determine that the application is complete, it is then assigned to a DBE analyst who follows that application from start to finish and makes a recommendation for approval or denial of that certification that finally arrives at my desk for signature. If we deny a firm certification, they have the ability to appeal our denial to the United States Department of Transportation. The United States Department of Transportation will contact us. They will ask for that file. We will send it to them, and they will make a decision to either affirm our denial or to overturn our denial and instruct us to certify that firm. If a firm is certified as DBE, they then have access to a whole array of what we call supportive services assistance. So as it relates to supportive services, we are offering firms training in how to get engaged at GDOT. We are offering firm information and access to capital. We are talking about how bonding can happen. We are doing what we refer to as bid matching. That means we're looking at the work activity on a project and communicating with the firms about how those work activities can be made available to them. We are doing networking between primes and subs so that the prime contractors are aware of who those subcontractors are, those DBEs that have the ability to do the kind of work anticipated by one of our federally funded projects. We're putting in the room together so that they can communicate their capabilities. We had 556 participants register for training in 2023. So that was either in-person or virtual training. In some instances, it was just one-on-one contact with our supportive services team to talk about what the needs of the DBEs are. So we are constantly working at communicating with those firms so that they understand where the opportunities are, how they can avail themselves of those opportunities. And then once those opportunities are made available, we're then monitoring those projects very specifically for that participation, because we need to be able to communicate to the Federal Operating Administration that we are aware of how many DBEs are working on our projects, what kind of dollars are being paid to those DBEs, where in the state those DBEs are working, what kind of work those DBEs are doing, and we're reporting that information to that Federal Operating Administration so that they are aware that we are utilizing those federal funds in good faith. So twice annually, we are required to report to our Federal Operating Administration on how we are spending those federal funds that we receive. So in June and December, we report to the Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit, and Federal Aviation how we are utilizing the monies that are provided to us. And so our most recent report, submitted on June 1st, 2023, reported a federal spend of $70,756,743 to disadvantaged business enterprises. What's really important for us is that $61,042,533 of those dollars were subcontract awards. So a full 40% of our subcontracts were awarded to disadvantaged business enterprises. That's important because DBE is all about subcontract. We set goals on federally funded projects where there are subcontracting opportunities available for DBEs. So we look at our project lettings every month. We identify the work activity by code that is associated with that project. We look then at the DBEs that have those work codes and set a goal, an individual project-specific goal, on those projects that we then communicate to the prime contracting community. So we are aware of what is available as it relates to DBE subcontract opportunity. We can communicate that to our DBEs so that they can get engaged with our supportive services staff. And we communicate that to the prime contractor so that they know that we know what's available on those projects. But the federal spend, which we are required to report on, is not the only place that we are considering disadvantaged business enterprise at GDOT. We record our expenditure with DBEs on our TIA program dollars at $3.9 million in fiscal year 2023. On our routine maintenance activity, we counted DBE expenditure at $3.7 million. And on our state capital construction, we counted DBE participation at $3.9 million. So that is an additional $11,661,182 to disadvantaged business enterprises beyond the federal dollar. So that says that not only is our federal program obviously working exactly the way that it should, but that we are aware of other areas of opportunity that can be made available to DBEs, and we are communicating those areas of opportunities. We are monitoring those areas of opportunity, and we are recording those areas of opportunity. On-the-job training, or OJT, is another area for which we have responsibility, So OJT says that we have a responsibility to identify minorities, females, disadvantaged persons that can be trainees on our federally funded projects. So per $1 million on a project, we'll have a certain number of DBEs, OJT trainees assigned to that project. So per million of dollars, $1 million equals 2 trainees. So if you got a $4 million project, easy math, you've got 8 trainees. So those trainees then are offered an opportunity to learn those highway construction trades that we are responsible for here at GDOT. CDL licensing, heavy equipment operating, flagging, estimating, plans reading, those are all areas of training that we offer on our federally funded GDOT projects so that those trainees have an opportunity to work on those projects and then gain journeyman status so that they can become employees of those firms with whom they are working. They don't maintain that trainee status always. In some instances, those individuals come to work at GDOT as our entry-level equipment operators. In some instances, they go to work for the prime contractors that are doing work at GDOT. In some instances, they go to work for MARTA as transit operators because they have the CDL licensing now. So again, the Fed expects that we will identify minorities, females, and disadvantaged persons for these opportunities, and so we're able to identify those folks, get them trained, get them attached to a project, and then get them to a journeyman status where they can become employees. Yes, sir. Small business, finally. We are growing, we are building, we are developing Georgia small businesses right here. So I talked about our federally funded supportive services. We have state-funded supportive services as well. So when we received funding from the Transportation Funding Act of 2015, we thought that it would be useful and important and efficient to have a program that supported small businesses, veteran-owned firms, disadvantaged businesses, the same way we do on the federal side. So we just replicated our federal program on the state side, and we have a supportive services provider that is providing assistance to our state-funded projects for DBE, small businesses, veteran-owned firms that have an interest in working on the state side. And so we have a physical location in Decatur that we refer to as the GDOT Business Help Center. And that GDOT Business Help Center is a location where we do training, where we do outreach, where we do networking, where we do one-on-one assistance for DBEs, for small business, for veteran-owned firms that have an interest in doing business with the agency. And so the firm that facilitates that help center for us is itself a disadvantaged business enterprise. So they have a great deal of knowledge. They have lots of understanding and insight into what a DBE needs, into what a small business is, into how a small business operates. And so in fiscal year 2023, we had more than 269 individuals participate in the training or other activity that we do there at the Business Help Center. And most of those firms were firms that were interested in our routine maintenance activity. So we have had to learn and navigate what's called the Georgia Procurement Registry. So the Georgia Procurement Registry is how the Department of Administrative Services, which is the procurement entity for the state, how they go about advertising procurement of goods and services in the state for every agency, including the Georgia Department of Transportation. And so because those routine maintenance activities are administered through that system, our supportive services team had to learn that system, and so proficient did they become at that system that the state of Georgia, the DOAS team, came to us and asked if we would partner with them in offering those supportive services across the state, not just for GDOT engagements, but for other entities in the state, because we did such a very good job of navigating that system, of identifying opportunities for firms that wanted to do business with GDOT, of getting them registered in that system, of helping them to identify the codes that would be necessary to get registered in that system, and then utilizing that registration as a point of entry for GDOT's routine maintenance activity. So DOAS took notice of that and asked if we would help them identify those same sort of opportunities for other entities. What we found was, when we were going through the procurement registry, helping those DBEs and small businesses, sometimes the work code that they had a specialization in was being procured at the Atlanta Public School System, at the University System of Georgia, at the City of Atlanta, or one of the other municipalities. And so we were helping them not only to find opportunities at GDOT and to get engaged here, but they were finding opportunities elsewhere. DOAS took notice of that and asked for our help in building and supporting the governor's small business initiative. So we're really very proud of the work that we do at that Business Help Center, but that other folks in the state have noticed that work that we do, the proficiency with which we do that work, the assistance that we are providing to those small businesses, and have asked for our help in growing their own programs. So those small businesses that I talked about do a variety of work. The commissioner pointed out that not all of them are transportation, but certainly the ones with which we have the most contact and the most interest are transportation related. So this is a project in, I believe, Lumpkin County, where we had DBEs do the striping on the project that you can see in this photograph. We had DBEs responsible for guardrail on this project. We had DBEs responsible for concrete on this project. It is a beautiful project. It is work really, really well done, and we believe it's indicative of the kind of quality of work that those small firms can do when they are provided an opportunity to do it. So we are aware of projects that happen all around the state. We work with our staff in the district to make sure that we are communicating about those projects and the opportunity associated therewith. We partner with our municipal government partners to identify firms that might be DBL eligible, to talk to them about certification, to get them certified, to grow the pool of firms that we are doing business with, able to do business with, able to communicate with. We assist our local governments in understanding and applying the federal regulations to their own federal aid projects. So we're doing training and outreach with our local government partners in that way. And we understand that the provision of that outreach, that information, that access must be done equitably in support of those federal regulations for which we are responsible. So we are constant in that mission. We understand that mission. We take that mission very seriously. We hope that we do a good job. We believe that we do. We think that we are able to see dividends in the outreach activity that we are doing. But Ms. Key always says when she asks me to accompany her or to go to an outreach event that GDOT is open for business. So I use that statement here on this slide. GDOT is open for business. We are constant in that business. We are always going to be here. We're always going to be working. And we want to make sure that we are communicating the availability of opportunity to those firms who traditionally may not have had the same sort of access. So that's what our civil rights programming is about. That is how and why we go about doing that programming. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ms. King. Is there any questions? I saw, yes.
Real quick. On the DBEs, do you provide like an electronic database that is accessible for prime contractors or general contractors to see where those DBEs are, where they fall on the specialty codes and all?
So we do have a DBE database that is available electronically to anyone, to the public who has an interest in looking for it. Sometimes we'll send the link, but it's available on our website. But if you ask for the link, we'll send that to you specifically. But we also have, through our supportive services provider, capability statements that are available for each of those firms, so that when you click on our database, what you get is the name of the firm, their contact information, and the NAICS codes, that numerical descriptor of the work activity that they do. But if you go to our supportive services folks and ask them to help you navigate a directory their directory, if you click on landscaping, for example, you'll get a capability statement, a one-page statement of the capabilities of the firms that do that kind of work activity. And that is a sort of synopsis of the experience of that firm, where and with whom that firm has worked before, what kinds of certifications that firm has, what kind of expertise, equipment, personnel, et cetera. So they give you sort of a one-stop shop, if you will, snapshot of the work activity. So yes, we do have a directory, but those capability statements are a wonderful way to find out who those DBEs are.
Are there any other questions? Mr. Gravely.
Thank you. Thank you, Director King, for this wonderful presentation.
Yes, sir.
I may have gotten it, but I want to make sure I didn't miss it. When you have to work with a local government, who would be your first call and restate that, who would be your first call, and do some of our local governments, counties across the state, have the equivalent of equal access programs operating at the local level that you would reach out to?
So depending on the nature of the call, if it is about an ADA issue, for example, we're going to be talking with either a public works director, or we're going to be talking with an ADA coordinator. And those coordinators are usually in that public works unit.
Okay.
If it is about a disadvantaged business enterprise question, we generally are talking to their small business folks. City of Atlanta, for example, have an equal business opportunity office with whom we work very closely. So we have, I think, counterparts in those local governments that do some of the same sort of work we do, but largely we're talking with either the equal business opportunity staff or their public works staff.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? I have two real quick.
Yes, sir.
One is related to your, to the disability area, and my question is, do we have a standard or a definition for what a disability is and what it is not?
We have a standard based on what the federal regulation describes as a disability, and how the federal law describes disability is the ability to do the major essential functions of life with or without an accommodation. So that is work, see, hear, drive. Can you do those things with or without an accommodation? If you can do those things with an accommodation, your workplace may have a responsibility to accommodate you depending on the nature of the job.
Okay, thanks. And the second question relates to investigations due to a complaint. Right now, do we have any such complaints or an ongoing investigation within the department?
We do. At any one time, we may have between 3 and 5 open investigations, and those investigations will generally sound in either employment discrimination on the basis of some protected class or sexual harassment. I believe we currently have 4 open investigations in a workplace of nearly 4,000 people.
Is there any way in those investigations, when there's a resolution reached, is there a way you might describe or characterize how those resolutions eventually work themselves out? In other words, is the department, is it grievously at fault in some way, or how does that play itself
If we
out?
determine in a complaint that there is merit to the complaint, we then open an investigation. That investigation will require that we interview not only the complainant, but perhaps the respondent and witnesses identified by the complainant. Based on that information that we're able to secure during the interview, we make a determination of whether or not this complaint had merit or does not have merit, in terms of it's more likely than not that this occurred as it was described by the complainant. If we make that decision, then we meet with our human resources counterparts in what's called the Employee Relations Unit, and we talk with them about our finding, and they then work with the unit that's impacted to make a decision about discipline or training or some other sort of resolution.
Okay. Anyone else? Thank you, Ms. King.
Thank you.
We stand adjourned.
Presentation today is STIP presentations by Kelly Gwynn, Assistant Director, Rural, Metro, Policy and Freight in the Office of Planning. Kelly?
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Good afternoon. I'm glad to have the opportunity to brief everyone on the department's current status on the update of our fiscal year 24 through 27 statewide transportation improvement program. Some of you have probably heard this referred to more commonly as the STIP. As you know from presentations here, there's a lot of acronyms that are floating around. This is one of the many ones that you'll hear a lot. The STIP is a federally required document. It goes through a joint review and approval by Federal Transit and Federal Highway Administration. It has to be updated at least every 4 years. So the current STIP that GDOT is operating under is a fiscal year 21 through 24 STIP. So we are good until the end of fiscal year 20 2024, which is June 30th. We are hoping for approval of this STIP within the next 2 months. So in the meantime, we operate off of the current STIP. This document lists any federally funded project phases statewide. This can also include projects that have a portion of their funds coming from federal funds, and then we still have to show that in the STIP document. Our 16 metropolitan planning organizations throughout the state, which are urban areas where the population is 50,000 or above, all have their own separate planning document called a TIP. It's the same 4-year document. The funding from these documents is incorporated into our STIP, but we don't list the actual projects for any of the urban areas. In the STIP, you'll only see rural project phases in there. So if you represent one of our MPOs throughout the state and you're looking at this document, wondering where your billions of dollars of projects are, those are housed in the TIPs for all the MPOs. So a lot of people in the past, especially general public, we try to get them to understand the importance of this document, because when you look at it, it's about a 400-page document. It can be really overwhelming. There's a lot of financial tables, a lot of project phases listed, but the importance of this document is that there's about $7 billion of federal funds tied to the approval of the document. So for us to be able to authorize the federal funds and move forward a lot of projects, it requires that the STIP update goes through appropriately and then gets approved by our federal partners. So you'll hear a lot of project managers asking when the STIP is going to get approved, because there's a lot of projects that are depending on STIP approval. You can see here on the pie chart, this is trying to do the best grouping that we can of the types of projects that we have in our program. You'll see an other category that is really a catch-all for projects that don't fall in one of these other project types shown. That can comprise anything from programmatic oversight for our major mobility investment program. There's a couple of Beltline projects in there, some construction management task orders. There are really a lot of projects that don't fall into other categories that you see. Another thing I wanted to draw your attention to on this pie chart is the safety projects. You'll see that that is one of the lower percentages, but what I want you to understand is there's a lot of other projects that have a safety component to them that we fund. These 4% that you're seeing here on the pie chart are solely projects that are funded by safety funds. They have to go through the evaluation and meet a certain benefit cost ratio, meet certain safety standards to get federal safety funding. But a lot of our traffic ops types projects also have a safety component to them as well. So this chart, the non-urban portion of the funds accounts for $4.7 billion. So the rest of the projects tied to the $11 billion you'll find in the urban TIPs. So the STIP is a long process. It's a very collaborative process. We depend on a lot of partners, both internal and external to the department, to update the STIP. We, back in the fall, our district partners met with all of the rural, local elected officials throughout the state. So we had one-on-one meetings with county and city representatives. These meetings are to show them not only what projects are in their counties, but they're also really beneficial because we're able to have conversations about other transportation concerns that they have in their areas. A lot of times, a maintenance concern will get brought up in these meetings, so it allows us to address other things beyond just project phases in the STIP. We also offered a meeting back in the fall to everybody that was currently on the board at that time. We sit down, use an interactive map, invite district representatives as well, and go through what projects are going to be in your congressional districts. There's a lot of coordination that goes on here at GDOT with program delivery, financial management, our intermodal division, making sure everybody's on the same page about what projects get included in the STIP, what projects are going to be ready to go for letting. And then we also brief the governor's office, have a review through USDOT, and then we are gearing up for our public outreach process. So right now, we are this week actually coordinating with our federal partners to address final comments on our draft STIP. So as soon as we get approval from FTA and Federal Highway, we'll start what's called our public outreach process. This is a 30-day period. So we're hoping for within the week to start that process, and so that'll run through mid-September. Starting with our last STIP, we switched over to virtual public outreach. Prior to that, we used to have in-person meetings throughout all the districts, and COVID really forced our hand last time to switch to a virtual process that actually ended up being really beneficial, a great use of resources and time. We saw an increase in the amount of comments that we received, amount of hits to the website. So we're really moving forward and trying to embrace the virtual aspect of this. What's going to be new this time around is virtual public open houses. So there's going to be 3 of those scheduled. They'll be held after hours, staffed by planning staff here at GDOT and also from our GDOT districts. So these will be live meetings where the public can drop in at any point. We'll walk them through how the website works, take any feedback they have on projects, and really try to be interactive and replicate those meetings. This is actually, in my opinion, a better option because a lot of times these meetings would be housed in one location in a large GDOT district. So, you know, you could have a public person that was 3 hours away from the meeting. So this really allows anybody from the state to attend at any point. We work closely with our communications division to develop what's going to be our interactive website. We'll have a map that you can go to, welcome video. There's also going to be surveys there online. And then we still have an option for the general public to contact their GDOT district office, schedule an in-person meeting, and be able to just look at the maps in person and get feedback there from GDOT staff. When you go to the map on the website, there'll be the option to do a search by county or a search by project type. You can zoom in on the map. You'll be able to click on the projects themselves, pull up information. This is, back in the day, we would have just a project, project board up on the wall and then the large document that people could flip through. This is also a way to let people search at their own time, be able to really zoom in to where they live, see what's going on around them in their neighborhood. And the last piece of this, the main reason why we're briefing you, is you're an integral part of this document getting approved. We have to, after we go through public involvement, we get approval from the governor first, then we come before the full board and ask for your approval before it goes to USDOT. So right now, if everything goes according to plan, we will be coming before you at the September board meeting, asking for your approval of this document. If there's a delay in us being able to start our public outreach period, that will have to ship to October, but we are fairly confident right now that we will meet the deadline for September. So, any questions from anyone?
Kathy?
I assume you're going to let us all know at the various stages when we can get onto the interactive map and
Yes.
where the public open houses will be virtual.
Correct, yes, we will let everyone know. We also work to do press releases. Usually there's a banner running on the GDOT website. We also work with all of the district offices, get the word out to local governments. And we're gonna, I forgot to mention on that slide, we're gonna have flyers at rural public libraries by the computer banks. So it's another way we're trying to drive the public, but definitely want to let you know so that you can encourage all of your public that you represent to come please visit the site, because honestly, the best time to get feedback on some of these projects is at the early stage. A lot of times we get feedback when we're already at the right-of-way acquisition stage or about to go to construction. There's a lot of projects in here that are at the early stages of scoping or preliminary engineering, so we really would love to get feedback. It's just hard sometimes with this type of document to get the public interested when they're just seeing a bunch of projects and not one in particular.
Any other questions for Kelly from members of the board or the committee? If not, Kelly, thank you for the presentation. I'm glad we got something positive out of the COVID to get to increase participation. So that's one positivity of it, perhaps. With that, Kelly, thank you for your presentation and your time, and we stand adjourned.
All right, thank you.
I'd like to call to order, please, the Gateways Committee meeting. Ms. Davis, would you come forward, please? Thank you, ma'am. Nice to see you today.
Nice to see you as well, sir.
Go right ahead.
All right, well, thank you so much. I am Felicity Davis. I'm the Landscape Architect Manager with GDOT State Maintenance Office. I'm going to talk about the REBC grant and update y'all on where that is standing currently. Oh, well, okay, there we go. Well, I'm going to start out by defining and giving you some information about what REBC stands for. We do love our acronyms at GDOT, and so I think this will be helpful, especially since it's not one of the more common ones. This is the Roadside Enhancement and Beautification Council. This is an entity that's established in law, and among other things, it advises on how to spend funds from the Roadside Enhancement and Beautification Fund. There are 12 members appointed by the governor. The chairs of the State House and State Senate Transportation Committees are on the board, as well as the Deputy Commissioner of GDOT. There are 4 members from various conservation organizations in the state, a member of the faculty from the UGA School of Environmental Design, the largest school of landscape architecture in the country, and then 4 members from the Outdoor Advertising Association of Georgia. The Roadside Enhancement and Beautification Fund is a dedicated fund which, again, establishes in law that receives funds collected from vegetation management and outdoor advertising signs, revenue from the wildflower specialty tags, donations for the wildflower fund, and any appropriations that may come for the fund. Contributory value fees from permits for outdoor advertising vegetation management permits are dedicated to fund the REBC grants. Now, these funds are the value of trees that are removed from the right-of-way in front of permitted outdoor advertising signs under our vegetation management program. The value of those trees is then paid into this fund, and it goes to put trees and other beautification vegetation back onto the right-of-way so it balances out. The funds for this grant program can only be used for beautification plantings and the cost to install those plantings. There is a little bit that can be used for irrigation, but it's limited. So these is primarily used to put vegetation and beautification back on the right-of-way from what has been removed. This is a reimbursement grant. The project will be installed by the grantee, and then the funds are distributed afterwards. There's a maximum amount that is allowed of $50,000, but no local match is required. Grantees must be a local government entity, or they must have a local government partner that will commit to the long-term maintenance, because we don't want something that's going to look really beautiful on day one and then deteriorate over time. And then, of course, all plans have to follow our policies for landscaping and enhancements on the right-of-way to make sure they're safe and remain beautiful and don't cause issues for the traveled way. There have been 6 phases or calls for applications since 2008, and we have these outlined here showing how each phase has broken down, how many applications, how many grantees, and then how much has been reinvested in right-of-way vegetation through this program. Our most recent one, we had 22 grants that were awarded. 16 grants have been reimbursed so far, and there are a couple that are still finishing up construction, and we expect to be finished this fall. Overall, there's been almost $5 million reinvested in beautification on the right-of-way through this grant program since 2008. And these are just some pictures of some previous ones. This is Cairo, Georgia. As you can see, there was some existing pavement that was removed in the right-of-way, and they took advantage of that to put up a welcome sign, and then the REBC grant went to plant around that sign and enhance it. This is Peachtree Corners, again, a previous phase, and as you can see, they had an existing welcome sign, and it was enhanced by some trees and shrubs and ornamental grasses through the REBC grant program. And then this is the City of Beaufort from our most recent call for grants. And as you can see, they had some existing trees, and they've just been able to add to that and make that an even more beautiful intersection area. As of June 30th, 2023, which was the reporting period for the last quarterly meeting of the RABC, there was $566,024.17 available for the next phase of grants. And then, of course, as we get additional contributory value fees from permits for the vegetation removal, that will be added to this amount so that we can do even more.
Phase 7 open now?
Not yet, but we're just about to get to that. We, at the last RABC meeting, which was on July 27th, it was voted that we would open the call for grants on September 1st of this year, with applications due by close of business December 1st of 2023. There will be a subcommittee meeting in mid-March approximately to review and finalize the recommended projects. Then those recommendations will be presented at the next quarterly meeting of the RABC and will be sent, the recommendation for funding will be sent to the commissioner for execution. And then we expect award letters to be sent out by the end of June of 2024. Prior calls have basically followed the similar timeline. We did have a little bit of a delay in the last call in phase 6 because of COVID, but we only had to extend it about 2 or 3 weeks, and we still had a lot of really good applications. We are partnering again with Georgia Department of Agriculture. We have our Georgia Grown provision in the in our requirements for the grant. And then we have a process for sending out the memorandums of agreement, getting those notifications back within a certain period of time. We give them a year to get a special encroachment permit to get out onto the right-of-way to do their work, and we do require that projects be installed within 30 months of the MOA effective date. We want them to also then claim reimbursement within 90 days so that we don't have funds sitting in the account that are not being utilized to put beautiful plants back on the right-of-way. And we do have a process for regularly sending notifications out to the awardees so that if something happens, if they have staff changes, if they have issues. We did have one time where a city hall flooded and they lost a bunch of records. And so if things like that happen, we're able to give them a little bit of a grace period for that, because we basically want this money to go out onto the right-of-way and be beautiful for our communities. We have notifications that go out through multiple avenues. We maintain an email list of people that call or email or request information when we don't have a call for grant open, for applications open. And so we email the information out. We have press releases that we put out through our communications group. We update our GDOT web page. And of course, social media is always out there. From the last time, we have an online submission system that has been created, and the link will be posted on the GDOT public website when the call for grants is open. Applicants can request PDF copies for a hard copy submission just in case of technical difficulties, and we can receive them by mail. Last time we didn't really have a lot of issues. I think there was maybe one difficulty that we had that was easily able to be resolved. So we've been able to receive things online, and that's made it very efficient and accessible for a lot more communities, I think. And so that is all of the current information that I have at this point about this grant program. We're very excited that we're able to have this call for grants, and we are looking forward to seeing some great projects come for us to review. Are there any questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any requirements that post-planning, there's any watering, maintenance, keeping them alive?
Yes, we do. We ask that they follow our 702 specification, which requires establishment care for the plantings. And then we also require, and this is part of our special encroachment agreement, for any kind of beautification plantings that a maintenance agreement is signed with a maintenance plan that addresses all of those basic points, because we do want it to continue to be healthy and look beautiful.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I just would take this opportunity as this rolls out and everything gets stood up, is we'll share that with you, but it's really a great opportunity for you to share with all your constituents in the cities and counties to make sure that, hey, pay attention. and this is open. It's sort of been over the different phases. Interest, I think, has continued to grow, and it's getting to be high demand. But please share this information, and like I say, as this gets stood up, we'll get an email out to you so that you can share that and forward it along. But it's a great thing. It's really a great program that the communities love, and like I say, it started out a little slow. It's been well subscribed to, but it really makes a big difference. So thank y'all. If anything y'all can do to say, hey, pay attention, or we'll get this information to your communities. It's really a big help to us too.
Thank you, Mr. McMurray. I was going to say a similar thing, that we need to get the local communities involved, because it's a great program. Get the garden clubs or whoever it might be that want to be involved in beautification, roadside beautification. And I appreciate very much the DOT being involved in this. And thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? We stand adjourned.
We ask the General Counsel to give an overview of the GDOT rule-making process.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm going to talk to you today about GDOT's rulemaking process. Okay, so what do we mean by rules? The rules and regulations of the state of Georgia are a compilation of rules and regulations for each agency and department, and they're filed with the Secretary of State's office pursuant to the Georgia Administrative Procedures Act, which we sometimes call the APA. You can find that in OCGA 1513-1. And what we're going to talk about today specifically is really 5013-4. And that addresses the procedure for the adoption, amendment, and repeal of rules. So just a note for clarification, we're not talking today about board rules. You may hear us talk about that sometimes. Those are the rules that govern this board's policies and procedures. So per diem, how you elect the chairperson, those matters. But what we're going to talk to today are the rules that govern this department. So for your reference, I put a very simplified hierarchy of legal authority on the slide just to let you know where the rules and regulations fit within that hierarchy. I included case law, but you can kind of get the idea of the weight that the rules have. So most departments and agencies have their own set of rules and regulations. These are all free to view for the public on the Secretary of State's website. I added the link there for you so you can access it. I did a screenshot so you can see where Georgia's rules fit within, and they're in Chapter 672. So if you click on 672, you will see all the sub-chapters for the department. So for instance, if you were looking for rules governing pre-qualification, you would go to Chapter 672-5. So there are a couple of reasons why we may need to amend rules. One would be that there's a new law that is giving GDOT some new authority and requires us in doing so to promulgate some new rules. Another one is there's a change in existing law. This could be state or federal law. And another one that comes up is if we have some out-of-date information in the rules, our website's changed, a link has changed, our address has changed, a phone number has changed, or we need to update the process and procedures that are outlined in the rule. So now we'll talk about the process of how we go about amending our rules. The legal office works in conjunction with the appropriate GDOT office and then any other subject matter experts, which may include outside consultants, to come up with a draft for the rule. It's important to note that we always collaborate with outside stakeholders and in order to ensure that the rules address their concerns to the extent possible. So once we get a draft, we make sure it's formatted in the form that the Secretary of State requires so that when it's time to file it, we have no problems. The draft usually includes a reference to the authority we have to make the rule, so that generally will include the APA as well as whatever specific section in Code 32 that we're talking about. So once these are drafted, a GDOT staff member will come to the board during the appropriate committee meeting and make a presentation about what we're amending or any new rules that we're bringing to you. So before that committee meeting, the board gets a packet, and you'll have three things in there. The first is the actual proposed rule, so that will either be the amended rule with track changes, so you can see any additions or deletions, or a set of the new rules. The second is a synopsis of the rule, and this is actually required by state law, and this will indicate the differences between the existing rule and the proposed rule, or it would outline the reasons for the new rule. And then the third is the actual proposed motion that we ask the board to pass, and this will be either in the form of a notice of intended action for amended rules or a notice of intended action to adopt rules. And this motion will give the public some information regarding what we plan to pass, the date that the board plans to take action, and then invites comments. So generally, the date for voting on a rule will be at a set board meeting, but it can also be at a specifically set board meeting, a specific date. So once the board passes that, we start the 30-day notice period. So during this period, the purpose is to give the public the opportunity to submit any comments, data, views, arguments about the rules. We go ahead and publish the changes to the proposed changes to GDOT's website, and we also go ahead and put notification in several newspapers. This generally includes the AJC, the Brunswick News, the Macon Telegraph, and the Daily Report, which is a legal organ in the state. The notification will include a reference to the rule being changed, the date the board plans to adopt it, the address as well as a mailing address for the submission of comments, and the deadline for the submission of comments. Recently, IT has been working with us to help create separate email address so we can make it easier for people to submit comments. So once all that is done, well, I should say, at the same time, the legal office will send a whole packet to the Legislative Council, and that will conclude the synopsis and the proposed rules. The Legislative Council then furnishes the packet to the presiding officers of each house with a copy of the notice. The presiding officers then assign the notice to the chairperson of the appropriate standing committee in each house, and then any member who has sent a written request for a copy. So after the notice period closes, GDOT will fully consider all the submissions we've received. And I will note that because we work with the stakeholders before we open to, the rules to comments, we very rarely get substantive comments. To the extent we do, though, and then we feel that we need to make changes, we do have to go through the entire APA rulemaking process again and open any additional changes open for comments to the public. So assuming no changes were made, the next step is the adoption by the rule of the board. We usually do this in the full board meetings on Thursday. The board will pass a motion adopting the rule, and it also authorizes the commissioner to file the rule with the Secretary of State. So the legal office then will take that along with the certificate page required by the Secretary of State's office that the commissioner signs and file it with the Secretary of State. I will note that the rule doesn't become effective until 20 days after we file it with the Secretary of State's office. So legal will usually send an email out and let everybody know when that 20 date we've hit the 20th date and the rules have been published that are now effective. And the last thing I will note is there's one nuance that we have to the process I previously discussed, and that is for our P3 rules found in Chapter 672-17. And I wanted to note this because in the near future, we will be presenting some proposed rule changes to this chapter based on some recent changes in the law that we've had. And this rule has one additional requirement, and that is that the House and the Senate Transportation Committees both be presented with the proposed rule for consideration and approval before the board can adopt it. So that's the process. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Very thankful for Annette preceding me and giving you a really fantastic overview of your role in promulgating these rules. So I do come before you today to talk about proposed pre-qualification rule changes. But before I do that, I actually have to do a little table setting. I have to give you some context. Pardon me. And so, in order to do that, probably the most public-facing office in the construction division is that of bidding administration. And with us today in the back, I know, is William Dunwoody, our office administrator. I'd ask William to stand just to be recognized. And William and his team do a tremendous job for us in delivering our design bid build program through a letting and advertisement and award process. When Albert is here tomorrow and he asks for consideration to advertise the letting, I want you to recognize you're passing the baton to William and the staff of 11 to oversee that process. And so last year, that was roughly 300 projects and just over $1 billion worth of work. So a very important part to this agency is handled through the Construction Bidding Administration Office. The other piece that they do is contractor pre-qualification. And that's the purpose of being here today, is to give you some backdrop to that and tell you about these proposed changes. So what is it? Why do we do it? How do we do it? Pre-qualification for us is really an effort to predetermine who's able to bid on our work. And what this gives us ultimately, and you heard Kimberly speak earlier, and I'm also thankful that she did the work she did to kind of tease this out for me on subcontractors. This gives us a registry of both approved contractors and subcontractors. And what this does is minimizes the delay in awarding contracts and also ensures the contracts are awarded only to reliable bidders. Now, as I say that out loud, that might seem intuitive to have a process that does that in advance. I'll share with you, not all agencies do that. Some will conduct the letting, they'll collect the bids, they'll tabulate those proposals, and in the end, you find out there were several on the list that never should have been allowed to propose. So our predecessors were pretty wise in recognizing, let's do that work on the front end. It takes long enough to get a project to a letting, let's try to get to construction quickly. So the process has a lot of merit. It occurs through an application process, which I'm going to say is a cross-section between the job application and the request for a loan. We ask for an awful lot of information. We want to know where you've done your work. We want to know the equipment you do it with. We want to recognize who the officers in your company are. If you're a prime contractor, we want your financials. But I'm going to keep this a really skinny presentation. If there's interest in pre-qualification in greater depth, we can get William to come, give you more oversight in that whole process, give you oversight in his office. But for setting up the context of these rule changes, I need to get you kind of squarely seated in that realm of what's it for and why do we do it. The application process is one that, again, is managed by William's office, but it passes through 3 different parts of the department. The process originates in bidding administration, then it has pieces that go off to our Office of Audits, and then pieces to go to the construction office. So we have SMEs that look into this. So when I say it's a cross between applying for a job and a loan, I mean it's a pretty serious process to look into this. It's very dynamic. We get applications every single day. Currently, and this currently as of Monday, there were 335 contractors which we issue a certificate of qualification. For subcontractors, where we issue a certificate of registration, is 549. So think about what Kimberly said earlier and how many touches they have in that DBE space. And again, there's an element of that is not highway related for sure, but a big portion of the population of these subcontractors are DBEs, in fact. And I don't want you to think of subcontractors as some, a disparaging way. That's actually a very important part of what we deliver. These are the folks that do everything from signals, traffic control, striping, as Kimberly showed, some concrete work. A significant amount of work occurs through subcontractors. So don't think that this is a small part of what occurs and delivers our program. It's actually a very big part. So with that little bit of backdrop, we have 2 proposed changes. First is the applicability of the rules, And the second is the registered subcontractor capacity formula. So this is where I'm going to beg forgiveness. I'm going to do something I really don't like to do, and that's read a slide in its entirety. But it's important to do this for the significance of the rule. So bear with me. Rule 672-5-.01, purposes of rules. A, the purposes of these rules governing the pre-qualification of prospective bidders are, 1, to minimize delays in the awarding of contracts after bids have been opened. 2, to ensure that department contracts will be awarded only to reliable bidders. B, these rules do not apply to contracts for routine or preventive maintenance, including but not limited to those contracts subject to Department Policy Number 6130-7, Guidelines for Maintenance Service Agreement, except in those instances where the department specifically requires pre-qualification pursuant to these rules. What a horrible mouthful, but a very important mouthful. In fact, I want you to focus on B. B is a carve-out, recognizing not everything we do fits neatly into the box of maybe highway construction. Remember, at one point in history, this agency was the State Highway Department, not the Multimodal Transportation Agency we are today. So when we think about how we pre-qualify folks, you have to recognize there's specialties out there, there's pieces out there that don't fit. And so if you look to this rule, this really reflects, I can think the biggest emphasis on it would have been when we had the TFA funding come through, when that bill was passed. Ultimately, we had an effort to try to quickly get up to a good state of repair, right? Return to that good state of repair. We contracted for a lot of preventive maintenance, routine maintenance work to do that. What it takes to go out and mow our right of way is a very different contractor, a very different company than what it takes to build a bridge. So we need to recognize we can still figure out if you're truly ready, willing, and able through another means, but not necessarily have to run you through Williams' office for pre-qualification. So as you think about contracting inside of GDOT for work, a big chunk of it occurs through Williams' office. The alternative delivery piece goes through the P3 division, through the procurement registry that Kimberly mentioned earlier. And then we also have work that gets contracted through Treasury's office, Treasurer Young's office, in the procurement office. So in fact, when we're looking at pre-qualification here, it really is a focus on design bid build and recognizing these rules were written for that in mind back in those days. So we need these carve-outs. So what we're looking to do is actually build off of that and recognize the evolution of where we are as a DOT. As good as our predecessors were, they couldn't have envisioned a day that we would talk about, and I'll make two references, that we talk about a national electrical vehicle infrastructure effort, where we're going to put electrical vehicle charging stations on designated corridors. It just flows off the tongue. I'm sure 50 years ago, these folks all thought of that, right? Take you back a little more than a week ago, hydrogen charging station. The folks that work in those spaces, quite honestly, as I think about the NEVI piece of it, the electrical vehicle charging, that's somewhere between the utility contractor and a commercial site development contractor. They don't do work with us every day. So that is the graphic of the square peg and the round hole. So let me read this proposed change to you. What we want to do, again, is build off of B and that rule. And in addition, these rules do not apply to those contracts entered into pursuant to OCGA 32-2-80 through 32-2-82, except in those instances where such contract specifically requires compliance with either part of or the entirety of these rules. Again, another high-calorie slide here. But what we're driving at is we can still figure out if you're capable of doing the work. When we look at that alternative delivery, an element of that typically is a request for qualifications. That's a bit like that application for a job, an application for a loan. Tell me who you are, tell me where you've done it, tell me your means to make it happen. And so as a statement of qualifications coming back to us, we can get at the same information William handles day to day in that discreetly highway-focused roadway and bridge pre-qualification by having this process in a different document. But I really need this change to be able to do that and be keeping in good order with our requirements and reflecting and honoring the rules. So that's change one. Change two is a little more involved, and I want you to think back to what Kimberly said about subcontractors. And I think I will not punish you by reading the entirety of the slide. as I did a moment ago, but I'm going to focus on a couple important pieces. So this rule, essentially, well, I'm going to read portions of it. Let me do this. The subcontractor is going to be assigned a maximum capacity rating. I want you to think about that maybe as a credit limit, right? I'm looking at you, a contractor, you've applied to us, a subcontractor, to do work for us. If I've never met you before, I have to establish a capacity for you. And that's going to come from your past work experience. And because you've elected to be a subcontractor, you're going to utilize a fixed formula that you see at the bottom there, Q equals F times 250,000. But when I first go to establish that capacity, I have no frame of reference other than your reference letters and your application itself. So I have to start somewhere in giving you capacity to bid our work. The subcontractors are limited to a maximum $2 million individual subcontract. Again, I want you to also recognize this. When I think of a subcontractor, these are not folks that carry a job for 2.5 or 3 years like a prime contractor does. These are folks that have sometimes very discrete work that they come in at the end, they pop out. Your grassing sub is going to be there the whole duration, per se. But there's elements of this work that's very discrete. They don't need $50 million worth of capacity. They've elected to work with something in the ballpark of $3 to $4 million of capacity. So the subcontractor is an election to take this route for prequalification. So the other element to focus on is that formula. So Q equals F times 250,000. Q is the maximum capacity rating. Again, how much contract value can we get you in contract for? Or in this case, that your prime contractor will get you under contract for. And then F is what we call the ability factor or a multiplying factor. So here's a little bit of a guardrail to this. All of our contracts get an analysis and a recording of performance. Every quarter, these folks are going to be scoring prosecution in progress, quality of work, cooperation, elements like that. And that gets tabulated and it gets weighted and it rolls back at the end of again, to the pre-qualification. Every 2 years you have to reapply. We look at that past performance and we say, okay, they've done better than they did in the past according to these scores. That ability factor, that letter F, will increase and your capacity will thereby increase. In contrast, if those performance ratings demonstrate you're doing poorly, then that capacity will actually get reduced. Now, look, a big frame to this is to understand ultimately a bonding company is the one who underwrites these folks. This is the agency saying, I think you've demonstrated your ability to do this much work. We're not guaranteeing they can do that. The bonding company is backing that up. But this is the agency saying, we're comfortable with these limits in these positions for these folks. So where this comes to light as a proposed change, if you think back about the past 24 months, either the commissioner or myself have been in front of you and we've talked about tremendous increases to construction contracts, to their costs. We struggled with projects we could award and couldn't award. Angela was up earlier today talking about trying to put some money towards this. In this subcontract space, that formula is not sensitive to market conditions. It's a static formula, right? And so we looked into it and the value has gone unchanged since 2006. I'm not very proud of that. In fact, that's part of the reason this rule has two desires that we're looking for. But I want you to think about this. The work is no different. The amount of people it takes to do it is no different. The equipment is no different, but it costs more. You're encroaching upon that cap much sooner than you would have. That's what's brought us to this. And quite frankly, if it weren't for the outreach of a subcontractor to me, I don't know that we would have looked deeper into this. This is one of those things that's an unintended reality of inflation is where we are. So we had to look at this and recognize a need for some focus upon it. So in focusing upon it, we also had to figure out what criteria would you utilize. So as I told you, Williams folks put about 300 projects out through award last year. We averaged roughly 3 bidders per project. There's 9,000 data points to look at and feel comfortable about making a decision on these rates. Equally, though, you can look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They have a category here of heavy and civil engineering construction. That's an indices that's provided by U.S. government. And similarly, the Federal Highway has a National Highway Construction Cost Index. So other resources that can give you a little bit of confidence in your decision-making as you look to consider increasing these values. So what we did, we looked at this as the pre-qualification committee, pardon me, and our analysis supported a 20% increase to that base, to that initial value of $250,000. I'm going to detail this a little better to tell you where we're taking this. So again, another high calorie content slide. I'm probably going to have to read this to you. I apologize. I'm going to skip down to the paragraph and emphasize this and come back to the formula. For state fiscal years 2024 through 2030, the value of B shall be $300,000. Thereafter, the pre-qualification committee shall perform or cause to be performed an audit of the value of B at a minimum of every 5 years to ensure that the value of B takes into consideration current inflation trends and other relevant market trends. Based upon the result of this audit, the department may amend the value of B by making an amendment to its pre-qualification manual, which shall be published on the department's website. So translating that, what we need to do is we need to have a period of again, to get on a 5-year cycle as a minimum. We can certainly look at this more frequently. If we have another pandemic, I'm quite certain we will. But this will allow us to get on a cycle of every 5 years, but also pull this away from the board rules. If I don't have this change, I'll come before this board every time there's a reason to modify this number. Mm-hmm. And in reality, we need to be more nimble than that. But most importantly, what we need out of this is that paragraph to induce the behavior to look at this, to purposely look at this and not allow it to have a great separation in inflationary impacts to our subcontractors. So now if I go back to the formula, the difference here is the letter B. In the previous slide, it said Q equals F times 250,000. I want to take the 250,000 out of the board rules and substitute the letter B. And B is that value that we will look at in 5-year intervals to see if it needs adjustment. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately what we get out of this, that 20% increase that I mentioned, so let's plug this in and give you an example. So if you first apply to us to build or to come in as a subcontractor, we're going to give you a performance rating of 11. The scale is from 0 to 20. We're going to start you out at one better than the middle. And that 11 times 250,000 is a $275 million maximum capacity rating to a subcontractor. The 20% increase that we've proposed brings that value to 3.3 million. So it's still somewhat modest, but it is in keeping with inflationary costs over a period of time. So with this rule change, what we'll have then is this agency will look at this more frequently, more intentionally, and we will not allow a long period to go where this is going unchanged, potentially limiting subcontractors from growth. What Kimberly didn't focus on that I will focus on is that in the DBE program, the desire is to graduate. The desire is to see someone do better. Truthfully, that's the same if anybody starts a business. I haven't heard anybody in my life say, I want to start here and stay here. It's all I want to do. I want to sell 3 a day, whatever this is. Nobody wants that. You want to grow. We need to provide a vehicle to recognize that this has an influence on how much work these folks can do. So those are the changes that we propose. I'm willing to take any questions on that. Yes, sir. I would think this is unusual. This is going to be growth or...
Yeah, there will be.
Inflation or whatever's involved in it, I mean.
Yeah, I think if you look, again, we have a really, look on a graph, you have the last couple of years really stand out. If you look away from that, it's a much more steady increase. So when it gets looked at in the future, it's probably not going to be 20%, quite frankly. But it is a necessary piece to keep pace with the cost of a construction dollar.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions?
No,
Well, yeah, let me speak to this. So I believe, and Kristen, you can correct me, I believe on the agenda tomorrow is the vote on this, correct?
Yes.
Is Matt still sitting back there? Yeah, the action of the committee of the whole or tomorrow is fine. Yeah, it'd be the same action, so tomorrow's fine.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you.
If there are more questions, and the meeting is adjourned Thursday. No. The meeting adjourned, join today.
All through, all done.